Hello, I'm Assemblyman Gabryszak, and welcome to Assembly Update. Every once in a while, the discussion comes up, the debate comes up on talk radio or on the street about where our money goes, how much money goes downstate, how much we may not be getting back upstate. We are going to talk today with Robert Ward, the Deputy Director of the Rockefeller Institute of Government here in Albany. They did a report called Giving and Getting. It's a report that takes a look at where the state's revenue comes from, where the state revenue goes. So hopefully we can have a little discussion and talk about some of the numbers that are in the report and actually give you a better idea and understanding of what the numbers are, and does downstate actually get more than what they send into the coffers of New York State. Robert, thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, Assemblyman.
Just before we get into the report a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Rockefeller Institute of Government is and what the mission, the main goal is of Rockefeller.
Thank you. We are part of the State University of New York. The Rockefeller Institute was created by the SUNY Board of Trustees back in 1981, and the idea was to try to bring some academic knowledge and expertise to bear on the great public policy issues that New York State faces year in and year out. And the Institute obviously was named for our former governor, Nelson Rockefeller, who did a lot to build up the state university system. So for the last 25, 30 years, we have been sometimes working with the legislature, sometimes with the governor's office and the executive agencies, trying to help produce some useful information that policymakers can consider as you wrestle with the great issues that you have to deal with here at the Capitol.
When you talk about useful information, I hopefully the discussion we're going to have here today is going to be useful to the viewers, and they can actually see, I think, an unbiased look at the numbers, and maybe kind of once and for all maybe set aside that discussion of upstate doesn't get its fair share or downstate gets too much. Oftentimes, I know when the discussion starts in the upstate area, in the Western New York area, for example, I know they talk about the amount of money that flows downstate because of social needs, the social programs and things like that. I know that that's a topic that we hear in the Western New York area. Is that a belief that's held, maybe throughout upstate?
Well, I think it's a very natural human reaction to think that somebody out there is getting an unfair share and I'm paying for it. When we look at the state budget, we really do see that because of the great concentration of wealth that is in New York City and the enormous amounts of income that are generated each year by Wall Street, by other businesses in Manhattan in particular, but by the downstate region as a whole. The numbers show, and we did a pretty detailed analysis of this, more than $12 billion flows up the Hudson River and out along the Thruway corridor, dispersed throughout upstate New York. Western New York in particular, after many years of struggling economically, fortunately benefits from the state budget in terms of school aid, Medicaid, transportation dollars, and so on. Obviously, people in Western New York also pay taxes to the state, income taxes, sales taxes, corporate taxes, and so on. But the net impact of all of that, when you look at the bottom line, is that Western New York and pretty much all of upstate is a beneficiary to a significant degree in the annual budget.
We're going to talk a little bit about the numbers that you have broken down, but just to give for background purposes, you took the state and you broke it down into regions. I believe you have 4 regions. You have downstate, which would be the New York City, Manhattan area.
We have New York City, we consider it as one region. A second region is the New York City suburbs, which includes Long Island and a couple of the northern suburbs, Westchester and Rockland counties. Then we separated out the capital region, Albany County and the 3 other counties right around here, because obviously this being the seat of government, it does get more funding than most other regions of the state. And then we treated upstate as sort of an overall region, so that Although we're well aware that Buffalo is different from Rochester and that's different from Syracuse or Binghamton, we do have that region altogether. And economically, in many ways, the different pieces, the different regions of upstate are very similar. Certainly, again, I think in terms of the net flow of payments into the state budget and receipts returned, all of upstate, again, is a net winner, if you will.
I know in the report, once again, it's called Giving and Getting. You took a look at the revenue sources.
Yep.
From each region, the amount of revenue that goes into the state budget.
Yes.
You also looked at the disbursements that went to each one of those respective regions. When you did that, you looked at that without federal money. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the idea there was really that what you and your colleagues in the legislature and the governor, I think, primarily wrestle with each year is what are we going to do with our own state tax revenues and other fees, you know, SUNY tuition and those kinds of non-tax revenues. I think everyone agrees in both parties and from all ideologies that if New York can get more money from the federal government, we're going to maximize that to the extent we can. So there's not much of a debate about that, generally speaking. The debates tend to be more about what are we going to do with our own resources? How are we going to balance the budget? What is the allocation going to be for school aid through the individual regions? What's going to happen with Medicaid? What are the economic development programs that will be funded in Buffalo and other areas? So we focused on what we call state source revenues and felt that that was the most appropriate way to do it.
Now, the numbers that are generated in your report come from budget year 2009, 2010, I believe?
Correct. Yep.
So you went back to that year. You took a look at both revenue and expenditures for the regions. Let's get into the numbers a little bit. Just in terms of on the revenue side, I believe that the New York City area and the 5 counties that adjoin the New York, which I guess we would classify as the downstate area, that in terms of a percentage would generate, in terms of revenue, what, about 70-some%?
Well, New York City alone is about 43% of the state's population. If we include the downstate suburbs, again, Long Island, Westchester, and so on, it gets us up to a little bit over 60% of the state's population. But that area overall generates a little bit over 70% of all the tax revenues, tax and other revenues for the state. So downstate is a disproportionate player in the state's economy. That makes it a disproportionate contributor to the state's tax revenues. Now, the good news, if we're thinking about this in terms of fairness, which of course is a subjective term, but there is a fairly close correlation between the level of personal income generated in each region and the amount of taxes that they pay. So that tells us that if we conceive of the state's revenue system as, you know, taking a proportionate amount from people according to their incomes, the tax system right now works fairly well. And then, of course, on the expenditure side, we know that the education formula, for instance, has always at least tried to, in part, address regional differences in incomes, so that schools in the city of Buffalo get a much more significant of their operating dollars from the state budget and the federal budget, for that matter, than do schools in the better-off suburbs in Erie County.
The school aid has always been and continues to be a source of discussion here in the legislature, and the governor's budget will be out next week. So I'm sure, once again, education will be part of that discussion. And I know there's always seems to be a debate in terms of the needs of wealthy districts compared to districts that have greater need, and I know the governor wants to bring the performance indicators into that, saying it should be both based on need and performance as opposed to just need. So that is going to be continue to be an item of contention and debate for a little bit of time. But it's interesting in terms of, because what you said were the population from downstate accounts for about 60% or just over 60% of the population.
Yep.
Politically, that also, in terms of what people see in the votes, they often say, you know, it's so weighted for downstate, and yes, it is, because that's where the population center of the state is, or the majority of the population. So they do get that representation, and in some respects, that kind of puts those communities and us legislators from upstate, you know, kind of behind the eight ball a little bit, just in terms of being able to get votes or carry the day on a vote or something that may be important to upstate, just because of that population base. Sure.
We have seen most of upstate really now for half a century declining in terms of population, if not in absolute numbers, certainly in relation to the rest of the country and downstate New York. Right now, I don't have this exact number, but upstate is somewhere around 30% of the state's population. Interestingly enough, when you look at the votes cast in the gubernatorial elections every 4 years, upstate casts 40% of the vote. So from a political, analytical perspective for upstate, the good news is that upstaters are more likely to vote than people downstate. So to some extent, at least, that offsets some of the population disparity. But on your point, I think some upstate groups have argued that costs for Medicaid, for example, and some other programs are higher than they might be because of that downstate dominance. And if there is a trade-off, if you will, upstate getting more from the state budget than it pays, I think that the trade-off is that the policies are shaped much more often along the lines of what some people downstate would prefer. So that's, again, one of the issues that arises, for example, in the Medicaid debate.
We have just over a minute left, and I just want to get down into, for those people in Western New York, if we can just talk about the number. You know, once again, they think the disparity is their dollars go downstate, benefits downstate. So if we could make this as crystal clear as possible in terms of the amount of money that comes from upstate and flows into Albany, and the return. It's safe to say, and from the vantage point, let me ask the question: does Western New York benefit from the current giving and getting?
There's no question about it. Western New York benefits from the distribution of dollars into and out of the state budget. Western New York is a net winner.
I think the report shows, I think it's about 8%. Western New York area gets about 8% more, I believe, than what they contribute to the revenue side.
It depends on what program you look at, and we could delve into the numbers, but we actually did not break it out that specifically. But overall, Western New York clearly gets more from the state budget than it pays.
Robert, I want to thank you for being my guest and talking about the Giving and Getting report. If you would like a copy of the report done by the Rockefeller Institute of Government, you could go to their website, www.rockinst.org. You can get a copy of that. Once again, Robert, thank you for being my guest.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for Assembly Update. We'll see you again next week.